Canada's large cent, an iconic coin that had a rough go at things, for a coin anyway. The first truly Canadian pennies, ironically, were minted in London back in 1858 when the province of Canada introduced decimalized coinage. Before that, the French and British colonizers used brass tokens and other countries' currencies as their own, but that's a topic for another video. According to the Charlton Standard Coin Catalog, there were a few proposed designs, sizes, and compositions for the first run of pennies, ultimately landing on a wreath of 16 maple leaves. Early pennies were a lot bigger than their modern siblings, hence the term large cents, at 25.4 millimeters, and that's a little bit bigger than modern quarters. The first few trial strikes were made from a copper-nickel alloy before they decided the circulation penny should be made of bronze, with some rare brass versions sprinkled in just to frustrate future collectors and people making videos about the history of Canada's large cents. The obverse design depicts Queen Victoria with some creative liberties taken by the engraver Leonard C. Wyon. The Queen was depicted as younger than she actually was at the time. She was 37 years old in 1858, and Wyon slimmed her down a bit for the coin's portrait. But to be fair, who among us isn't guilty of relying on one really flattering photo for a few years? The inscription around Queen Vicky reads Victoria di Gratia Regina, which is Latin for Victoria, Queen by the Grace of God. Going back to the Charlton catalog, the Canadian government was perhaps a little overenthusiastic about their new 1858 and 59 large cents, and ended up ordering 10 million of them, way more than they could put into circulation. Both East and West Canada already had a huge supply of lighter copper tokens issued by banks and individual people, which kind of slowed public adoption of these new coins. And because of that, most of these 1858 and 59 pennies sat in their original mint boxes for years, with some being sent to New Brunswick in 1861 to bolster their supply. The remainder were held by the Bank of Upper Canada until it closed its doors in 1866. At that time, the bank was offering to sell the pennies at 20% less than face value, and they still had a hard time getting people to take them. The catalog said the Dominion of Canada inherited a few million of these large cents in 1867 and passed them out as regular currency. They had so many of this first round of large cents, the mint didn't need to make any more for nearly 10 whole years. So, because the minting process didn't start until late 1858, only 421,000 of them existed for that year, making them rare and very valuable. According to coinsincanada.com, an uncirculated 1858 large cent could fetch you upwards of $9,000 today, and a very worn-down coin can still net you around $25. The 1859 varieties can also get you a pretty penny. The first ones of them were minted with overdates, using a specifically designed wide 9 stamped over the second 8. Most of them didn't have this overdate and instead had a more narrow 9, which had a few different varieties. And because of this huge amount of variation, some are rarer than others and have an equally huge range of prices. Once again, according to coinsincanada.com, a low-grade bronze 1859 with a narrow 9 can sell for about $5, while a brass 1859 with narrow 9s in fine condition has sold for a whopping $33,900. Back to the history side of things, the Dominion of Canada didn't start minting its own pennies until 1876. The new design featured 3 reverse dies, the provincial and large leaf varieties engraved by our old friend Leonard Wyon, and the small leaf variety engraved by George de Soles. The obverse had a new portrait, also engraved by Wyon. It had Queen Victoria sporting a fashionable tiara or diadem, depending on which term you prefer. This new portrait was modeled after the Jamaican halfpenny and Prince Edward Island large cent. That portrait was changed slightly 4 times until Queen Vicky's death in 1901. These varieties were known in the Charlton catalog as C1, C2, C3, and C4. The different portraits, leaf sizes, and date sizes meant there were again a lot of different varieties for large cents from 1876 to 1901. The differences might not be super obvious at first glance, and even less so if the coin is worn. To a serious collector, these differences could mean the difference between a small profit to a big payday depending on their rarity. After Queen Vicky beefed it at 81 years old, King Edward VII stepped up to the plate and coins with his portrait entered circulation in 1902. The King Eddie cents kept the small leaf design of the Victorian coins with the same composition, size, and weight. They were also the first large cents that were minted in Canada. The Charlton Catalogue notes that collectors should keep an eye out for the 1907 H variety. Only 800,000 of those were ever minted, and they can catch a little bit of a premium because of it. Now, King Edward VII was a heavy smoker, even by the standards of the day, and his reign didn't last very long as a result. His ailing health got the better of him, and he lit up his last cigar in 1910, when he died at 68 years old. Not a bad run for a chronic smoker. In 1911, a new monarch appeared on Canada's coinage, King George V. Fun fact, I didn't know King Edward VII and George V were different people when I first started collecting because they looked very similar at first glance. With the 1911 large cents, engraver Edgar B. McKennell broke tradition by removing the Latin phrase de gratia from George's title. Instead, the inscription read George V. Rex et India Imperator, or George V, King and Emperor of India for those of us who don't speak Latin. This caused a little bit of backlash, and people started calling them godless pennies. The reverse featured the same wreath as before, but this time dies were engraved by William H.J. Blackmore. By this point, the minting process moved away from England, and the Royal Canadian Mint fully took over production. The De Gratia inscription was brought back in 1912 to now say, King and Emperor of India by grace of God. The British were really proud of their oppression of Indigenous people, India specifically. According to coinsincanada.com, a 1920 large cent could get you up to $1,300 if you're lucky enough to find one in mint state, while they only go for a couple of dollars if it's worn. These coins were in production for 7 years before they switched to the small cent in 1920. The small cents will be covered in another video. The large cents were a big part of Canadian coinage in the country's early years, and to a coin collector, they're a great addition to have. Thank you for watching this video, and if you liked it, why not subscribe? I hope to use this channel to do some more long-form videos about coins throughout history. And I want to give a huge shout out to my main sources for this video, the Charlton Standard Catalogue of Canadian Coins, coinsincanada.com, the Royal Canadian Mint, and numista.com.